Hello and welcome back to Gript Media. My name is John McGurk and this is The Week That Really Was with my colleague Sarah Ryan for Valentine's Day. And I am glad, Sarah, it's Valentine's Day to welcome you back to the show after your absence last week for very understandable reasons. But I tell you, I'm glad somebody has saved me from the clutches of Laura.
Yeah, I listened back and she didn't let you away with much, John.
No, she didn't. Laura is a fearsome advocate and arguer, and yes, I certainly got a new appreciation for how kind you are to me. So that was good. So it being Valentine's Day, I thought I wanted to start the show because our friends at thejournal.ie have issued new advice. They have said that if you are a man on Valentine's Day, and I want to ask you how wooed you'd be by this. It's by a guy called Micheál Martin, and he says, as men, the best thing we can do for women at Valentine's is to become their allies. He says, women need good men to stand with them against growing misogyny in these challenging times, writes Micheál Martin. So you're a woman. You have, I think, been romanced a few times in your life. Was it when your beloved husband first wooed you, did he come up to you and say that he was going to just be your partner in life against patriarchy, or how did he do it?
Imagine what my response would be to that. First of all, I bet you Finian's interpretation, or what Finian thinks is being an ally to women, includes letting men into the women's changing room. I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that the journal and the profile means that that's probably the case. But I'm more from the kind of Jordan Peterson school of, sexual politics when it comes to that. I think we need men. I don't need men to do anything for me. I think I need men to be men for themselves. I think men are it's the worst time probably ever in the history of the universe for to be a man, particularly a white Irish man, I'm sure, or white man in general. And I think that men get a hard time, and ultimately I think that article speaks into what I hate the most, which is a culture that perpetuates this thing, which is that women are somehow victims, always in need of help, always, danger around every corner. Everyone's always trying to pay you less and treat you different because you're a woman. And I don't subscribe to that victim mentality. So thanks, Finian, but worry about yourself. I'm grand.
Yeah, I mean, lads, I'm not going to present myself as some kind of Lothario here, but when you look like this and you end up married and you do all right for your life, you got to have some skill. So here's my advice. Nice restaurant and listen more than you talk. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's the only advice I have. But it's better than, I suggest you do not go up to her and say that you're going to be her ally in the fight against the patriarchy, because she will pat you on the head and say thank you very much, and then she will move on to find a member of the patriarchy to.
But I suspect strongly that a lot of women who even like that shite don't like men who go on like that.
No, of course they don't.
That's the con. You know what I mean? I remember a guy, and I was definitely already with Keith, but this guy said to me one time, he's a bit younger than me, and I came into a conversation and I said, oh, what are you guys talking about? And he said, we're talking about our favorite feminist book. And my favorite feminist book is We Don't Owe You Pretty, which is a book about women not having to wear makeup. Have you ever read it? And I just said, oh, I don't read any of that shite. Sorry. And he looked like someone had just kicked him in the face, like he was about to cry. And I was just like, mate, you probably think that's game. And that is literally the most unmanly, unattractive conversation I've ever had in my life. You think that I'm going to be like, oh my God, he doesn't think I owe him pretty. So hot. Ugh, no.
And plus, you gals ain't wearing the makeup for us anyway. Be honest. It's not for us. It's for yourselves. It's for each other. It's first of all because you want to look good yourselves. Secondly, it's for whatever kind of status thing you women have got going on between yourselves. And we guys are the third rung on the ladder for the old makeup.
I think it depends. I think it depends on the situation. But, a man trying to kind of impress me by how much of an ally he is to women is just, if I was single, I'd just be like, well, that rules. I find it the opposite of attractive. I find it repulsive, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I think a lot of those guys who hang out with women and tell them, let's all talk about feminism and let's be your ally, get friend zoned faster than the fucking speed of light, if you excuse my language. And even those women who like that nonsense, don't date them. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, well, tell you, there's some good Valentine's Day advice from Sarah. Don't be that dude. So we are, that's our duty to be the alternative media platform to the Journal and others covered in relation to Valentine's Day. Let's talk about what actually happened this week. And I think it was, I sent out an email to subscribers this morning. Well, I wrote it before we recorded the podcast, and it's going out before the podcast is published, but it's technically going out on Friday, saying it's been a banner week for the old migrant crime. Because I really don't like the phrase, because I'm a wuss and I'm a lefty and I'm a liberal and all the rest of the things people say I am. I really like the phrase migrant crime by and large, because I think there is just crime, and you can look at how much of it is committed by various demographic groups, but I think you have to recognize that there's crime committed by all. By we have homegrown burglars and homegrown rapists and homegrown everything else, and I think you can't just bang on about the migrant crime. But as we say in an editorial this week, migrant crime is different because the government is more responsible for it, because the government has brought people to your shores or permitted them to stay there. So this Dublin slashing attack, it wasn't really a stabbing attack. Now, Ben and Jason covered it in their podcast the other day in some detail. But since then, it's come to light that this guy who is accused of carrying it out was actually arrested by the cops in 2022 for an immigration offence, which I understand to be staying here without a visa, his visa having expired, and for being in possession of 6.5 grams worth of cannabis. And yet he is still there. He's still in Ireland. He's still in a position 3 years later to stand accused of slashing 3 people randomly on a Dublin street. So what did you think of that?
I mean, I think there's 2 different conversations there. One is, migrant crime and the conversations that people want to have about that and the illegality of somebody staying here and committing a crime or whatever. And then the other conversation is just the very, very actually fast over the last couple of years, in my opinion, normalization of a level of violence and crime particularly within Dublin city centre that's just unbelievable. And we're kind of almost getting used to it. And, we were there was umpteen things that we've spoken about on this podcast that happened last year and the year before that were about, there was an American guy, I think he died, beaten up. He did end up dying, as far as I remember. There was a number of attacks on tourists. There was a Ukrainian guy who was walking down O'Connell Street, wasn't it, who was bitten and attacked, coming from some theatre thing. There was a load of attacks, and I just feel like the city centre is becoming more and more and more violent, and we were sort of gaslit that was the public word, that wasn't really real, and Helen McEntee had it all sorted. But the truth is that Dublin city centre is just infinitely a more dangerous place now than it was 5 years ago. And yes, we can talk absolutely about the origins of those crimes or whatever, but the truth is there was no crimes at this level with this consistency happening in this way 5 years ago. And since COVID, I think Dublin city centre in particular has just gone to the dogs, and we're, hopefully it'll be different now, but we were subjected to a minister who just acted like that wasn't happening.
Yeah. Well, my favourite story, speaking of the whole attacks on tourists, is that obviously this week it can be reported for the first time that 2 of the teenagers who attacked Stephen Termini, who's one of the American tourists you referred to, he actually survived, but he nearly lost his sight, if you remember, from being multiply kicked in the head. And the attackers were underage feral Irish youths, and they were sentenced to 26 months and 32 months in detention, respectively, by Martin Nolan, who said that in mitigation, no weapons were used and the boys demonstrated some concern while they were kicking him in the head. So that's how much they got in prison, and they're being released. But I do think, though, I think you're right, first of all, that there's a generic issue with crime. But I think there's a substantive difference between the case where 2 Irish lads attack somebody and where a foreign national does. There's a substantive difference in that, when you were born an Irish citizen, you have the right to be here, whether we like it or not. And I'm sure there are many Irish citizens who we would perhaps rather weren't.
Like to get rid of. Yeah.
Yes, that we'd like, ideally, if we could, buy a nice little chunk of the Antarctic and send up a camp there, call it, Ireland South or something, and send people there. We'd like the opportunity to do that. But by and large, that's all we can do because there are sovereign citizens. And if they commit crimes elsewhere in the world, people have a right to send them back to us and so on. When it is somebody from overseas, as in this case, it's alleged to be somebody from South America who is here on an expired visa, then the fact that this person is in the country, first of all, is a crime. And the fact that they've not been deported is a failure of the state, which means that everything that they do thereafter is the state's responsibility. It's the state's fault because this person is in the country and the state hasn't removed them. So the state has an actual hand in that crime being committed because they made the decision for that person to be there. No?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm struck by the contrast with a different case that was reported this week. And people may have seen this, they may not have seen it. But the Sunday World reported the case of a woman called Donna O'Loughlin. Now, Donna O'Loughlin lives down in County Clare. She was at home one day in the last couple of weeks, and she got a knock on her door, and she answered it, and it was representatives from Air being the mobile phone company who were there to try and sell some kind of broadband package or internet package or new phone, whatever it was. And she looked out and she recognized one of the guys. And his name was Mohammed Kashif. And the reason that she recognized him was that last year he was convicted in court of sexually assaulting her. And he, I believe, got a suspended sentence for that and was free to go about his business. But he had been convicted of quite a serious sexual assault on Miss O'Loughlin. And she recognized him. She's like, here's the guy who was convicted of sexually assaulting me. He's now at my door selling me broadband. So naturally, you can imagine this is a traumatic experience for her. So she phoned up the company he was working for and she said, do you know who this guy is? And it turned out that according to the company in question, he had gotten through their vetting because he had spelled his name slightly differently on the application form. And they said they've taken the appropriate action and he's no longer with the company and so on and so forth. But you know what I thought was interesting? The company apologized. They said, this is a statement from AIR, as reported by the Sunday World, the safety and well-being of our customers and employees is a top priority and we maintain a strict reference check policy to uphold this, which was also followed in this instance. We are reviewing our internal procedures to ensure such an incident does not recur in the future. AIR has directly reached out to the complainant to extend our sincere apologies. So my question is this, and it's a rhetorical question, it's more an opportunity for you to talk because I've been waffling on now for 5 minutes, but that company had to apologize for their basic failing to do the correct due diligence or the fact that they were duped. So why in a case where somebody who's here having on an expired visa commits a crime or otherwise causes distress to an Irish citizen, does the state not have to apologize for failing to do its basic duty to get that person out of the country?
Good question. I mean, I'm not sure that they shouldn't. And, it brings me to it's Marie Sherlock is the TD there.
Yes.
And she wrote a tweet, which as far as is my understanding has been since deleted. But it really spoke volumes as to, the kind of mentality of, people who are on a certain side on some of these issues. And she said that the victims of this slashing attack, that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of them was in his gaff. He was in his porch of his own house. So that's not the wrong place at the wrong time. If somebody breaks into the house tonight and murders me, you wouldn't say that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm in my house. Where else would I be? I live here. So, but it's just this kind of, I don't know, there's a sort of casualness is not the word, but it is a kind of this is a real tragedy and, let's all reflect on this, and people are, wrong place at the wrong time is what you describe when, you're walking across the road and that unfortunately happens to be a drunk driver driving down the road and they hit you.
Mm-hmm.
You cross the road at the wrong moment. Not in your house. When somebody who is here illegally, who's already been convicted or in the process of being convicted of crimes, has, come to the attention of the police, or whatever, is now slashing you in the face or whatever. That's not the wrong place at the wrong time. And Marie Sherlock, this new TD, it just speaks a lot to where her mind is at.
She is the one, by the way, for those who don't know, she defeated Jerry the Monk Hutch by a couple of hundred votes, I think, on transfers. Do you remember that, to take that seat?
Yeah.
And we were at the count that day doing live coverage, and we she came back, she got all the left wing transfers, and she got elected, and she got across the line. Yeah, I have to say, I'm not a huge admirer of her abilities. I'll put it that way.
That's very kind of you. But I think that it's people who, like, ultimately at the end of the day, people who live here, born here, live here, whatever, there's a social contract that you buy into. You work or whatever if you can. You pay taxes or on the money over a certain amount of money that you earn. You have your children, you send your children to school, you educate your children, you whatever, and you pay taxes for a reasonable expectation of certain things. And I think that there should be a reasonable expectation that the government have kind of organised things so you're not getting stabbed in the neck by somebody who shouldn't be here in the first place.
No, but what I think drives people crazy, particularly crazy, and certainly what drives me, I wouldn't say crazy, but certainly bugs the shit out of me, is what we have to listen to. Because we have to listen to them standing up there in front of us, these politicians, saying, Ireland needs a firm but fair immigration system. Remember that? We need the public to have confidence in the immigration system. Do you remember that? Of course you do.
Yeah.
We are going to toughen up the system and make sure that our laws are being respected. Of course, etc. I am not sitting here, nor are you sitting here, and I think people listening to us or watching us can see that we're trying to discuss this in a reasonable, calm manner. We're not making it about people's nationalities, backgrounds, whatever. The simple fact of the matter is the laws of the land say you require an in-date visa to be here in the country. And if you do not have one, you're here illegally. That is a law. That is a law that the Oireachtas passed, the minister commenced, that the Gardaí and the state is tasked with implementing. And they are not implementing it. And as a direct result of that law not being implemented, we have a person accused of a very serious crime. He may well be.
And we have victims.
We don't know. And we have victims, as you say. And these people will stand there and bleat all day about the benefits of immigration. So good, and diverse society, and bringing people in. And I admit that there is truth to that. There are massive numbers of successful immigrant stories in Ireland. We all accept that. But you will not stand up to the fact that you are given one job, which is to make laws and enforce them. Because last week they brought in this stupid new speed limit on rural roads, where I now have to drive about 60 kilometers an hour for 4 or 5 miles to go into my local town on a road that is perfectly straight, perfectly safe. And by the way, I think I'm the only person obeying the new speed limit. But if I get caught breaking that, I know where I'll be, in court, handing over cash to the state. But some other person comes here from another country and breaks our immigration laws. And what do they get? This guy was, according to the Daily Star, in Garda custody, up on drugs charges. And he's still here. That is you, the state, not doing your job at a fundamental, basic, contractual level of what you're supposed to do. And you stand up there and your answer is, it's a terrible incident, our thoughts are with people were just in the wrong place. Off. That's anyway.
Wrong place, wrong time, sad. Thoughts and prayers. Yeah, brilliant.
I'll tell you who's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every single one of you who are in government making the laws and deciding not to enforce them. You're all in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's what I think. Anyway, then we'd more of it today in Munich with this business of that's how I say today, obviously being Thursday the 13th when we're recording this, but this business of a car in Munich, which appears to have driven itself into a large crowd of people, according to various media outlets.
I hate when cars do that.
And
a child amongst them, as far as is my understanding.
A child amongst the victim. And I was obviously being sarcastic. It's driven by a 24-year-old Afghani asylum seeker who is resident in Germany. But some media outlets have reported this in the passive. A car drove into a crowd as opposed to the car was driven into a crowd. Anyway, what was your reaction to that, sir?
Just more horror. It seems to be getting worse all the time. It's just a lot of death and destruction. And, I tell you what it creates. It's just really beginning to feel like it creates a feeling that people who are in positions of power have lost control and they don't want to admit it. That's what it feels like.
I sent a tweet today, and I know I send tweets every day, but they're not always very popular. But I always think if a tweet crosses the 1,000 likes barrier, it's pretty popular. It's reflecting a sentiment. People are not only liking it, they're happy to be seen retweeting it, or I know they're not seen liking it anymore, but they're happy to be seen to engage with it. I think it catches some kind of, once a tweet goes over 1,000 likes, it's generally reflected some kind of popular opinion. And what I said was, I am not, and I've never have been, a supporter of sort of what you might call the hard right political party. So if I was Britain, I would still lean more towards the Tory party than Reform UK. If I was in France, I would still lean more towards the Conservatives than the Le Penites, etc. That's just who I've always been. I've always been sort of a mainstream conservative centre-right person. But I'll tell you now, and what my tweet said was, how do you blame a single German person who goes into the ballot in 10 days' time and puts down Alternative für Deutschland number 1? They are, of course, what our friends at the Journal would call the far-right German anti-immigration party, AfD. But how do you blame any German citizen who does that? You can't. It's almost the logical thing to do, I think, right?
Well, because you're terrified. It's scary. I mean, there's a point at which, especially people who are raising children and stuff like that you think you can't, it's like the amount of over the years in places like Belgium and other places, you really quietly you notice that bollards get erected around Christmas markets and stuff so that they can't, very slowly this kind of the world has changed such that if you're in Germany or somewhere and you're at a Christmas market, that's a consideration now, that might happen. And I think it seems to be only getting worse. And yeah, absolutely. If you're living there and you're raising your children there, you just get to a point where you get sick and tired of living in fear and being governed by mealy-mouthed, little fools who are more concerned about using the wrong word and hurting somebody's feelings than they are in actually addressing or tackling anything in any meaningful way.
You made an interesting point there about bollards protecting Christmas markets, which is now, and yeah, I've been to a number of European cities in the last year, and now a lot of pedestrianised streets, you're seeing the fresh bollards put in to stop cars driving up and down. And it occurs to me that, do you ever notice that every couple of years you'll get a feature in an Irish newspaper, could be the Independent, could be the Examiner, could be the Irish Times, where they've gone to America, and it's, our reporter has gone to America and our reporter has seen horrible things. And one of the things they always report upon is some middle school somewhere in Topeka, Kansas, where there are now metal detectors at the gates where the kids have to walk through and make sure that they don't have submachines with them to murder all the teachers and all the other students. And isn't
it awful?
Isn't it? This is what American society has come to now. Isn't it awful? You will not find a similar piece from a mainstream journalist visiting a German city and saying, look at these bollards here. It's because, there's a real record now of people of a certain heritage driving cars down the street into crowds of children and pensioners. And what has caused this? You won't find that, because it's only, that kind of story is only reserved for, aren't the Americans in a shocking state, God love them. That's the only time you see that story.
Yeah, but the bollards are there for everybody to see, and they're and bollards and basically we'll call them anti-terror attack measures are popping up all over the place, and nobody ever talks about it.
Yeah. So do you think the AfD will do well in the German election? I mean, I know neither of us are experts in German politics, so don't take this as a prediction from either of us. But
yeah, no, I'm not an expert in German politics at all. But I think that the timing of this is extremely, extremely damaging to, the opposite view, put it that way. Because, people just don't like, the optics of this kind of horror show happening to, normal people going about their day, children being driven over by cars or whatever. But also people don't like the optics that their country and the way their country is, their control is being lost.
I just think there's only so many times that the media can do the trick as well. Do you know the Journal trick? Stephen Redmond in the Journal, he writes this every now and then. He wrote it after the Dublin stabbings. It's the piece which basically says, yes, there was a stabbing. And those horrible people, they made hay out of it. those people who wave the flags and they engage in right-wingery on the internet and they spread fear and misinformation and spread fear, and it was terrible. There's only so many times the media can do the trick where they're like, you should be more afraid of the guy over there in lederhosen waving the German flag and saying, I'm for Germany, instead of the lad driving the car down the street at high speed, whacking into people. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
And I think a growing number of Germans are reaching that tipping point. Irish people haven't reached it yet. Irish people are still out there for the kind of like, I know it's not great, but I still wouldn't want to be like that Nigel Farage. There's still a fair bit of that here. But at some point, if we keep having people slashed on Dublin city streets, I think that's going to change too.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, when we talk about Senator Martin Conway.
Yes.
Do you want to lead off? I feel like I've been doing all the talking on this episode. And people like you more than me, as the comments tell us every week.
I mean, okay. I don't really like to pile on to people, especially when it does seem like a person might have an issue with drinking. And I don't think anybody, as we often say, we're in our 40s, and I don't think anybody, anybody Irish, but certainly anybody over a certain age in Ireland hasn't come upon, had a family member or known somebody well who has an issue with alcohol. So I do have a lot of sympathy for that. However, I think I would have more sympathy if our election that re-elected Martin Conway, when people in his party knew all about this. I think I would have more sympathy for him if that election wasn't about 45 minutes ago. And, just the kind of the carry on, this is sort of something about this whole thing stinks of, the worst things people think about Fine Gael, which is a sort of an entitled, arrogant kind of, Martin Conway, grand, doesn't matter that is being investigated for this, that and the other. Doesn't matter that he's pissed and has to be put into a cell by the police because he's on fours on, was it O'Connell Street or whatever he was doing? It's conduct unbecoming, I'm afraid. If you had a job in as an investment banker in a bank and that ended up in the public domain, you would lose your job as well. And you wouldn't be losing your job as an investment banker. You wouldn't be losing your job as, as a member of an organization within the investment bank. You'd be losing your job fully. And so I don't like to pile on to people who clearly have problems, but I think that somebody in authority in Fine Gael should have been able to spot this coming a mile away and should have done something about this from a disciplinary point of view before it had to become such a big story.
Yeah, well, it's for me, it just says an awful lot. I mean, first of all, I kind of say I agree with you. The first thing you said, I mean, I actually, if it was just, and I wrote a piece about this at the time it happened at the beginning of the week, and I said, if it was just a case that this guy had mixed his alcohol and mixed his sleeping pills and been found crawling around O'Connell Street in the middle of the night, I honestly would be tempted, and I genuinely, hand and heart, would be sitting here and going, let's give the guy a break. That kind of stuff happens. I mean, there, but for the grace of God, go any of us. Maybe you're taking medication, you don't know how alcohol reacts to it. Maybe you've had a bad day.
Oh, maybe I think not. Sorry, hold on. 9 times out of 10, that whole sleeping tablets and alcohol thing is just bullshit.
Well,
that's just no. That's okay. Just it's like the the actress with the pill popping problem going to rehab for exhaustion. It's bullshit. If you're on strong tablets, you don't, and you're told not to mix alcohol with them. If you insist on mixing alcohol with them, you have an alcohol problem, and your behaviour after that is on you.
Well, I remember one time now.
I accidentally mixed my medications, and that made me act like a maniac. Spare me.
I remember one time now I was young and stupid. You know, when you're young and stupid, as George W. Bush famously once said, when I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible. And I remember drinking red wine and white wine in the same evening, and maybe some rosé as well, not knowing, not having, or even not cared about the whole "you don't mix your wines" rule, and ending up in a state not very far removed from the one that Martin Conway ended up in, although mine was on private property rather than on O'Connell Street.
Excuse me.
But even if
you weren't a senator, you weren't a public representative. I'm sorry, but I'm
just saying, if that was it, if it was arrested for public drunkenness was the end of it, I wouldn't be proposing that we have this conversation, but that's not it. The thing is here, he also implicitly admitted, because it has been widely reported for several weeks that the Fine Gael politician, etc., had essentially been accused of, the precise word was, inappropriate behaviour with a junior female political staffer in or around the Oireachtas in 2018. That something been an investigation, and €10,000 had been paid to a charity. And that
and he a married man, is that right?
Yeah. Well, look at you with your 1950s morality, and he a married man. I mean,
that's not 1950s morality. That's just the book of sound. That's just the book. That's just the book of common decency, John. If you're married, you're not like you're married and you're you're involved in something like that. No, that's not 1950s morality. That's just, play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
This is why Sarah never became a TD. She just stuck to the old political kind of the old morals, of 1940, whatever. In Leinster House, that's not a big deal. That's all I'm saying. I might agree with you. I might even agree with you here in public, but I'm just saying. Anyway, it didn't stop Martin Conway anyway, for whatever reason. Even though it probably would have stopped you, and it would have stopped me, and I think it probably would have stopped most decent people. It didn't stop him, the fact that he was married. And he also then, we are told, paid €10,000 in relation to that incident in 2020. Now, to really get to the crux of my point, Sarah, is this. When the tragedy happened with, I don't know why I called it a tragedy, when the brutal murder of Ashling Murphy happened, we got Fine Gael politicians coming out and engaging in the whole, what I would call, national conversation about the conduct of Irish men. That we're all bad eggs, and we need to buck up and pull up our socks and not be such bad eggs. We have Helen McEntee, when she was Minister for Justice, rolling out waves of legislation to target various male offences against women. We had the revenge porn law, we had all that sort of, and constant messages that there's zero tolerance for this bad behaviour. And yet we know Fine Gael at a senior level were aware that one of their own senators had paid a substantial sum in charity to receive an apology for a young woman that he had behaved inappropriately towards. So it's not really about Martin Conway. It's about, is there anything these people are straight on in terms of what is there anything you think they actually genuinely believe, to the extent that they'd sacrifice some political credibility to stick to their principles? Because I'm struggling to find it.
No. And also another thing that I find, quite offensive about these kind of things is, back to my earlier point, which is that, there's a big smokescreen of, I resign immediately from the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, and everyone's like, oh my God, he resigned. He still has his job.
Yeah.
He's still a senator. So I always think that that's kind of like this weird smokescreen. And I wondered, is there members of the public who are only partially engaged or only partially paying attention who think, he's lost his job. He hasn't lost his job. He's still a senator. He'll still get the exact same amount of money into his bank account next month as he got last month.
Possibly more.
Whatever.
Possibly more. I don't know. And I please don't. I'm only saying this, but in the Dáil, there's there's an allowance if you're an independent. You get an extra allowance. I don't know if that's the same thing in the Seanad, but possibly more.
Perhaps, but I don't believe that no longer being able to call yourself a Fine Gael senator for, at the beginning of what may very well be a 5-year term is a consequence. I think that's just, that's not consequences. That's not accountability. That's not, there being a demonstrable, consequence to whatever you've done. That's just, I'm not allowed to use the same sticker. But so what? He's still got the same job. And people voted for him. A lot of people voted for him, I'm sure, who didn't know about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, see, this is the thing. This is my point. I perhaps in the general election, where he got a number of votes but wasn't able to take a seat, you might say that. But in the Seanad election, he was elected to the Seanad, as you say, about 45 minutes ago. Not literally, but certainly in relative political time.
Was it last week, the week before?
It was last week or the week before, whichever one it was. And he was elected with the 60 or 70 votes, which were cast for him by Fine Gael TDs and senators. He was on the Fine Gael leaflet to elect people to the Seanad, which basically, so for people who don't know how this works, if you are elected to the county council as a Fine Gaeler, right, and you're a Fine Gael councillor, Fine Gael headquarters will send you out a letter before the Seanad election, and they'll say, these are our candidates on these Seanad panels. There are 6 of them here, and you are to vote 1 to 6 for these 6 people. And lo and behold, when the count comes, because it's all politicians voting, you'll generally find that if you add up the total number of votes for Fine Gael candidates and compare them to the total number of Fine Gael councillors and TDs in the country, they're roughly an exact match. Maybe one person voted for their mate, the independent, but by and large, am I wrong? It's a match. So Martin Conway got elected with the votes of Fine Gael councillors at a time when Fine Gael politicians were, I mean, we're not saying all of them were, but certainly the highest levels of his political party were aware of this story, because this story was first reported by Fionn Sheehan in the Irish Independent in early January when the Seanad election was still going on. So they knew.
Well, fair enough. They just didn't care.
So
next time you're lectured to about, women and all these kind of things by Fine Gaelers, you'll know that they don't even believe it themselves, obviously.
Well, they see it probably wouldn't have come out. I mean, I'm thinking here, I think a story that has relevance here is our friend Cobalt. Do you remember Cobalt? The Russian spy? We all know there's a politician in the sorry, I nearly said the Seanad. Politician in the Oireachtas. Who is reputed to be spying for Russia. And that hasn't come out because, there are obviously legal consequences to identifying that person. They can sue. You need to be absolute. Even the people who are 99% sure can't be 100% sure because it's about spying in international diplomacy. Whatever. And so I think when the Irish Independent and Fionn Sheehan put these questions to Fine Gael in January, and then the first report came out about a Fine Gael politician, I think the arrogant bastard simply thought his name would never come out. That's what I think. And then, unfortunately, poor old Senator Conway falls flat in his face drunk on O'Connell Street, and half Dublin knows who it is. And he has to put out a statement because that's fairly easy to find out. So he has to put out a statement saying it was him. And by so doing, has implicitly linked himself and, is now widely known to be the person involved in the original reporting about getting handsy with the staff.
I mean, why are you surprised? Do you not think that there's just a huge amount of hypocrisy across the political class and stuff like this as it is? So are you really that surprised?
I got an email today from a person who worked past tense in Leinster House, not as a particular, not for a political party, not actually as political staff. Is what I'm saying. And that person basically wrote an email into me. And this is the nature, you get tips, right? And I'm not going to name anyone. I'm not going to say anything that was in the email, but the email basically listed a whole series of politicians and said, this person did X, Y, Z, and and it was a list. And it was, I know it. I can tell you their names. I can tell you what they did. I can tell you that some people stood down, and this information basically tallied up. But it could have been entirely fabricated. I'm not saying it's true. But that is one of about 5 or 6 emails I've received in the last 4 or 5 years, naming individual politicians for this stuff. And it is an open secret in relation to some people in Leinster House. It's an open secret.
When you say this stuff, what do you mean? Sexual misconduct?
Yes. There was a phrase in relation to one particular member of the Oireachtas, and I'm not saying it's a sitting member or a past person. You can paraphrase this email, which said that he'd been dropping the hands on young people of a particular gender more often than Jimmy Savile, was the phrase that was used in the email. So, again, I'm not in a position to confirm that, so I'm not going to use any names. But I'm saying the amount of tips you get like that are almost impossible to stand up, because you need to find somebody to go on the record and say, this happened to me. And then they're making themselves a victim. And then if they come out in public and say it was me, or get named, it's huge pressure. And then if they're a member of a political party, oftentimes there are those who will counsel them that it's important now to stay quiet and you've got a good career. And a lot of that stuff still goes on. And our political class pretends it doesn't. And it absolutely still goes on. The pressure on people who are the victims of, even if it's low-level sexual misconduct, even if it is just the guy who's a little bit senior to you, who puts the arm around you and tells you you're a lovely young girl and squeezes you a little bit too tight, there's always the pressure to say nothing and not rock the boat. And, there's a reason why a lot of people are still getting away with this stuff in politics. Would you disagree with me?
No, I'm just looking forward to the end of the podcast when you can tell me who those names are.
That will be.
I'm sure. I mean, look, everybody who's been involved in politics or been around politics or whatever has heard stories about different things over the years. So,
exactly.
But there's a campaign of silence that goes on about some of the things that happen. That exists in other professions as well. But other professions aren't as flahuluk with the lecturing about how we should all behave and what we should be doing as politicians are.
Yeah. Like you and I both know multiple people who've been involved in politics who would, without naming people, would basically regale you with experiences that would make your hair stand on end. It's a real phenomenon that. So when I see them on television lecturing the rest of Irish mankind about how to behave, it's just like it's very hard to take in some instances. All right. Speaking of somebody who's just joined that whole arena, Fine Gael appointed Evan Coolan to the Senate this week. Swapping probably actually one of the few people to be taking a pay cut by joining the Oireachtas, the RTE sportscaster.
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
Well, I thought I will say that people in RTE, people in media, journalists joining political advisory roles, political campaign teams, or getting nominated to the Seanad, like overall just kind of gives me the ick, because I think that it just continues the absolute erosion of the credibility of our media classes. So there's that for starters. But it's funny, I was... my father-in-law's funeral was yesterday, and my best friend, or one of my best friends, she was there, and she's extremely sporty, and she gave me a completely different perspective on Ivani Quillen and said that she's really involved in sport and real advocate for women's sports and is this and is that and the other. I didn't know anything like that about her. So my friend, who'd be, quite similar-minded to me politically on a lot of things, was actually thought it was a good appointment, and it sort of changed my perspective on it a little bit. But overall, I think that the nomination of people from any kind of media or anything like that, it just doesn't play well with the public. And I think that the truth is that a lot of people in the public, they don't really understand the Seanad, as in they don't really fully understand. And I don't mean to patronise anybody, but I just do think a lot of, Joe public people don't really understand that there's nominees, that there's panels, that there's, you know what I mean? Like Taoiseach's nominees, that the electorate of one is the councillors, the electorate of another is graduates from different colleges. You know what I mean? Like there's a huge amount of people who've asked me in the last few weeks, like friends of mine who are not political at all, who've said to me, can you explain to me, like, how come, like, how did they nominate? They don't really, they'd kind of forgotten or weren't really tuned into the 12 Taoiseach's nominees and whatever. So I think if you're sitting at home and you let's just say, for example, you, not to name any names, but you voted against or didn't vote for somebody in your constituency in a Dáil election, and then you see that they weren't voted for in a Seanad election that they ran of their political colleagues, will say their political colleagues didn't elect them in a Seanad run, and now they're getting nominated by the Taoiseach. I think if you're sitting at home eating your dinner after going to work and paying your 52% tax over a certain bracket and putting your kids through school and trying to do this and trying to make ends meet and trying to worry about it, you kind of think to yourself, what's the point of this shit? Like, are we the fools? Like, are we just fools sitting at home? Like, and I do think that there's a level of contempt there for the public if somebody is rejected repeatedly in Seanad runs, in Dáil runs or whatever, to just nominate them in.
Like
I do.
Anne Rabbit or Lorraine Clifford Lee, both of whom...
Well, Anne Rabbit is who I was thinking of. Like, if you're, I'm sorry, but like, I just think for Micheál to nominate Anne Rabbit after Anne Rabbit has failed to get elected in 2 elections or whatever, considering all of the, like we're told all the time about how important women are in politics and how important the Seanad is, and we say the Seanad and we're this. And like, when I think of all of the interesting women that are out there that could have been nominated, like Sandra Murphy or Leisha or De Bruyne, or people or women who've never been involved in politics, like, anything, or forget, like men, different people with interesting expertise. Like, I'm sure there's some nerd out there who's an absolute expert in AI and its consequences on the economy. Like, let's get that guy in there and bring a bit of, like, whatever. The point is, I just think that, like, it's just a tired kind of system. And I just don't think the public, the ones who are tuned in, I don't think they like it.
What I want to know is what Micheál Martin sees in Lorraine Clifford Lee. I'm fascinated by this. I mean, Lorraine Clifford Lee ran for the by-election in Dublin, Fingal, as it then was, in the last Dáil, if you remember. And she lost that by-election after this media outlet, amongst others, reported that she had...
no, it was John. It was you. Just admit, it was you.
Had engaged in colourful past rhetoric about members of the travelling community and various immigrant communities. I believe she'd used some very uncomplimentary words about travellers, which would certainly not be something that Micheál Martin would endorse. She lost that by-election. She then lost in the general election in 2020, and she lost in the Shannon election that followed that election. Am I right so far? I think I am.
Yeah.
And she was nominated then, given a free seat in the Shannon, having lost a by-election, a general election, and a Shannon election. So then, after 5 years in the Shannon to build her profile, pass legislation, and do all that sort of stuff, there's no legislation to speak of. I can't think of any bills that she's been the lead sponsor on. She's given a few speeches about the importance of women in politics, all right. But she then loses the election just gone for Dublin Fingal West. Doesn't get in there. So she runs for the Shannon again amongst her fellow politicians, and she loses that election again. So now we're up to 5 lost elections, 5 rejections from both the public and her fellow politicians, and a record of saying things that are, shall we say, racially insensitive and having to apologise for them. And Micheál Martin has appointed her to the Shannon twice. That's interesting, I think. And when I would just love to have Micheál Martin on this podcast, it'll never happen. I'd love to have him on this podcast to just ask him one question, which is, Micheál, what is it that you see in Senator Lorraine Clifford Lee?
That rhymed.
It did. I hadn't even prepared it, but it did rhyme. But I just think it's an interesting question. Let's move on. Just on Senator Van Niculen, one last thing, which is to say that one thing you'd said about the public will eat this up. Like, Fine Gael will run a Van Niculen for member of Parliament, member of the European Parliament, or a TDC at the next election, and she'll walk in because she used to be an RTE. I mean, have you learned nothing about the fact that they got Rosa Tralee elected and that Mairead McGuinness is now a front runner for the presidency because she used to present Ear to the Ground and so on? Like, don't delude yourself. She'll walk into a seat wherever they nominate her. I fear. Well, I don't fear. She might be wonderful, but I fear your confidence in the public might be.
I don't know anything about her apart from what I was told about last night, that she's, apparently pretty good advocate for sport or something. I don't know. But 100% that's what's going to happen, because that's the way the world turns in Ireland. But I never cease to be disappointed. And I think that those, 12 nominations or whatever it is, 12, 11 they had between them, could have been so much more than they were.
Yes, they could have. They could have done a lot of those nominations, and they didn't. But somebody who has done a lot with his nominations is your friend, Donald Trump. Let's talk about his week briefly in the few minutes we have left. Just today, on the 13th of February, a historic day. A bad day if you're in big pharma, or if you're somebody like me who likes being healthy and taking his vaccines. Your friend Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was nominated as Health Secretary, confirmed as Health Secretary by the Shannon, US Senate. We have a peace plan in Ukraine, which basically involves Ukraine handing over everything to the old Ruskies. And what else has been happening? Oh, yes, we've been shutting down more agencies. How have you felt that's been going, that whole Trump thing, for the last few weeks? You must be delighted. All my readers are delighted, so I probably should pretend to be more delighted.
First of all, you forgot the biggest, the most exciting, hugest, most wonderful, glorious thing that any politician has ever done, which is the order that he signed about the paper straws.
Why is it all you women are with that? Laura Perrins, I don't think she said it on air last week, but when she wasn't battering me around the head on air, she was off air. She was celebrating about the paper straws. Fana McGunning runs into the newsroom, or the virtual newsroom this week, to go, paper straws. What do you have against paper straws? I love them.
How do you love paper straws? maybe it's because you I don't know. Maybe it's because
Is it lipstick or something that you have that dissolves them? I don't know. Women seem to hate them in particular. I just don't like them.
Like, you're not trying to cram this soggy piece of paper into a smoothie for a screaming child as it disintegrates in your hand. Paper straws are garbage. No. But also, I am a fan of Diet Coke. McDonald's Diet Coke in particular. And the paper straws in McDonald's, it's disintegrating. I might be drinking a McDonald's Diet Coke over a period of about 2 hours. And the straw is lasting about 12 minutes. And it doesn't taste the same if you snip it out of the side of the cup. Listen, I've made my feelings about the paper straws very well known on this podcast in the past. So I was really happy about that. But also would bring a tear to my cold heart when I saw all the girls all around him as he signed orders to stop male cheaters being allowed into women's sports. Glorious day. Sanity's prevailing. Not allowed to have your pronouns in the end of your email if you work in certain sectors of the civil service. Absolute joy. Back in your box with your nonsense and shut up. And so on and so on. Loads of good stuff, John. Loads of good stuff. Don't be starting now with your TDS, because this is all, like, there was loads of good shit there.
I have to say, I love the new press secretary. Can I just say that? Because I just to like pretend I'm going to go into recovery. You know, in a couple of weeks you'll get me with a MAGA hat or something. But for the moment, I'm still in recovery from my TDS. So I just say I love the new press secretary. I think the new press secretary is tremendous fun. I was watching her the other day on Sky News, and she was wonderful. Although somebody who was watching it with me, who I won't identify, but there are only a limited number of people who might be in my house watching the television with me, so you can figure out how that might have been, said that all she needed was pom-poms. So I thought she was actually very, very good.
When she started listing off where the money had gone, and she's like, when the Democrats are all whinging about things that were cancelled, here's a list of where money went. 2 million on gender classes in Iran and all this kind of stuff. And it was chef's kiss. I want somebody in Ireland to stand up and say, 75,000 euro for Trinity College to run the vagina monologues on ice, and 52,000 euro for Schindler's List to be reinterpreted from a transgender point of view, and 750,000 euro so that two people can, make art installations out of menstrual blood in the name of feminism, and then so on and so on. Let's have somebody do that from Ireland, because I guarantee you we have equivalences and absolute nonsense.
Although that stuff isn't as new as you might think. I remember, and people can go back and they can look up this ancient history, and it won't be relevant to them because they'll think I just have TDS for bringing it up. But in or around about 2004, at the start of George W. Bush's second term, I believe, there was a massive fight about something called earmarks, which is basically, earmarks is if you're in Congress and a bill has 217 votes, it needs 218, you go to the leader, say the bill is about, providing funds for school, and you say, I'll vote for that, but I want what's called a rider on the bill, a rider, which is a little clause at the end of it going, I'm from Iowa and I want $450,000 to study transgender tadpoles in the University of Iowa. And that's only $450,000. We tack that onto the bill, and the bill gets passed. And they do that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times in a process called earmarking. That's what it was called. And there was a huge war on earmarking at the start of the 2000s, where Republicans made that their cause celeb. And all this stuff that we're hearing about now, all these weird studies, the $50,000 to study, the effect of raindrops on ice, et cetera, et cetera. That was all exposed before, and nothing got done about it.
John, but come on, like, these kind of things existed before, but like, it's been on steroids now for a few years. You know what I mean?
Politics
it's the same in Ireland. Same in Ireland, same in America. You know what I mean? I guarantee you, as we speak, someone is getting a 15,000 euro grant to study in Trinity College. Can nits be transgender? You know what I mean? Like, just no. And I think that the exposure of it and the talking about it, it's making a show of people who've been hiding in plain sight, taking government funds to push their agenda and to do stupid things and wasteful things, and not to, beat my old favourite hobby horse. But, as I said, 75,000 euro for a thesis on can nits be transgender, but still no children's hospital.
Now, can I just say this? Because people will still shout at me, but I'm going to say this. I think what DOGE is doing is wonderful. I think, as you say, we need one in Ireland. We need people to stand up and go through these line items, but not for the reason of this is great, they're cutting spending, because the spending is minuscule in the larger context of the budget. So I listened to some of the stuff she's standing up. She's going through items with $2-3 million. That is not a drop in the ocean. What it is, though, is it's really important to expose the inherent ideological problem with the government, which is
100%.
All this nonsense gets funded. It is their equivalent of us funding the National Women's Council and funding Alcohol Action Ireland and all these other NGOs that waste your money on absolute fucking nonsense and suckle at the taxpayer teat, while their opponents have to scrimp and save and battle around in the mud to get any attention at all. It is exposing the ideological agenda at the heart of government. That is, I think, the single best thing this administration and President Musk are doing.
Yeah, well, it's nothing to do with the cost savings of it. It's the culture. It's the culture of nonsense. It's dismantling a culture. It's exposing something, the absurdity, the absolute absurdity of something that has set in, an ideological cancer that is set in some of the large organizations in the States, in Ireland or whatever, where people take a lot of money to do things that are pointless. And, we still are lots of people in Ireland still. There are lots of problems in Ireland that need to be addressed that aren't being addressed, while somebody, takes 50 grand for Schindler's List reinterpreted, whatever, nonsense. And that's not about taking 50 grand and specifically putting it into another thing and that will make that better. That's about challenging the culture and challenging a rot that is set in of entitlement and madness, quite frankly, just madness of spending on stupid stuff because somebody somewhere's feelings were hurt and now they need money to feel better.
I think you're right. And look, we'll leave it there for this week before I get in any more trouble on that topic with the listeners and indeed the viewers, for those watching on YouTube. So thank you very much, all of you, for paying attention to us and just about keeping us apace with Ben and Jason and their weekly offering, because I still think we're better. But, I think they're just better at marketing. But we'll get back at them over the next couple of weeks. It's been a joy to have you back, Sarah.
Thank you.
A real joy.
Good to be back.
And we'll be back next week for another edition of The Week That Really Was. Until then, have a great weekend, have a great time, and stay sane. Take care. Bye.